Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0 coming your way, episode 76. Today we're talking about dangers of high prolactin on cycles, compliments of Euro-Pharma. So look, in this episode, Mobster and I, we're going to go over something that's not talked about enough out there. It's not a low-hanging fruit topic. You know, everybody seems to be avoiding it and nobody kind of dives deep into it. So we have the latest information on what happens when it comes to prolactin. We're talking about what is prolactin, what role does it play for men. If you Google out there about prolactin, it gets very frustrating because 95% information out there is for females, female pregnancy, female this, female that, but you don't see very much information out there about prolactin, even though prolactin plays a huge role in men, and it can affect a lot of things in your body. So this podcast, we're going to focus on the male aspect of prolactin, which is something that is really, really hard to find out there. And even if you're a female listener, we have a lot of female listeners as well. This is an important one. So you can educate yourself on prolactin in case you do have a spouse that uses a steroid or peptide or any type of compound that can raise prolactin. This way you'll know exactly what is going on there, because it can change the dynamic of your love life and your relationship. So we're going to talk about what are the symptoms of high prolactin, things to look for with that. We're going to talk about, as I said, what steroids compounds can cause high prolactin, and more importantly, how to combat it, because it can be combated, luckily, and quite easily it can be combated as well. And we're going to talk about Euro-Pharmacies, and Euro-Pharmacies is a great place to buy any of these compounds or peptides that we're going to kind of talk about on this podcast. So let's start off on Mobster first. You know, let's talk about prolactin. What is it? So it's a hormone. It's well known in the role of promoting breast milk production. So with females, when females get pregnant, obviously the prolactin will spike during the pregnancy, during the third trimester. And this will enable breastfeeding for the mother's newly born child. So the baby is born, the mother is able to breastfeed. And that's what the most common thing out there when it comes to prolactin is known for. But with males, when we use compounds that spike prolactin, or if you have high prolactin, you can actually, and we've seen guys on the forum come on here and say this jokingly, you can actually squeeze your nipple and have liquid come out. It's usually like a brown liquid. Sometimes it's more white, but a lot of times it's brown. It's really disgusting. The more you play with your nipples, the more it gets squeezed out. So we've seen that. And it's definitely, once that starts happening, it's a problem. Like, you let it get so far where it becomes a problem. And I've seen that over the years on forums, and it's not good at all. It's no laughing matter, even though some guys seem to think it's funny. You know, my nipples are you know, giving out. No, it's not a good sign. It means in your body, things are going on that you don't want to go on, and they have a domino effect of side effects. And we're going to go over those side effects shortly. Mobster?
Yeah, Steve. I mean, I'm familiar with some of those posts, and they're, to be perfectly honest, quite gross. I used to reply slightly tongue-in-cheek, well, stop playing with your fucking nipples then. But you do wonder sometimes, and the naivete perhaps of the individual in question, where they've allowed this to go so far as to have this particular effect. So, you know, for example, if they had gyno, they should be telling us about gyno. What they shouldn't be doing is, or itchy nipple, Steve, what they shouldn't be doing is waiting to the point where they've got some weird coloured milky fluid being squeezed out at the end and then coming onto the forum and asking us, because you think, Jesus Christ. To be fairly honest, Steve, and I think this also applies, when I was seeing these posts back in the day, it was really going to come down to the lack of information. And if I'm honest, and if I thought about it, especially as we do the pre-show research, I haven't really seen as many posts of that type as I used to. And that's because, like this show, there's more information available. The accessibility to the products that can help you with it is more available, and so on and so forth. There's something else, Steve, and this is more to do with the male side. So we definitely have a reason for a prolactin existing in men. And it isn't because we've got nipples and we want milk to come out of them. But for example, Steve, it aids in the post-ejaculatory, i.e., when you've come, lowering of your old man. So basically, it's what helps you, whether you like it or not, lose the erection after you've come. And of course, that can be with some of the products that we might discuss today and how to inhibit it, boost your erection. So, for example, it plays an active role for some people in erectile dysfunction, but that's also going to come down to, and we'll touch on those again. If the person's unfit, they're more likely to have problems with erections. If they've got blood pressure, they're more likely to have problems with erections. But prolactin plays a role there as well, Steve. So yeah, I mean, again, this is one of those things, as Steve says, that perhaps we should talk about more, because we're over familiar, and I say over familiar in comparison with the role that estrogen plays in men and in women. And of course, we know that we need some estrogen in our bodies. We see sometimes, and you and I have answered these kind of posts, Steve, when we see people say, oh, I'm going to take X, Y, and Z compound and I'm going to crush my estrogen. You go, no, you don't want to do that. Equally, you don't want to completely remove every single milligram of prolactin in your body. You need a certain amount of estrogen. You need prolactin to play a role. And of course, we are arguably messing around with hormones. So of course, we need to understand that. Where I've seen the most information come from, Steve, was from TRT doctors, and it's a good indicator for them the condition of the person they're dealing with, what's going on in their body, and it's one of those hormones they keep an eye on. So there was a lot of good information coming from the TRT doctors themselves. And again, something I want to sort of emphasize in that particular regard, the better TRT doctors, the better endocrinologists, not, as Steve and I have talked about in other shows, the piss poor, charge you $200-300 a month, takes your money, gives you TRT, fucks you off kind of clinic. No, these are the ones that are taking an actual interest in what's going on, your health, and so on and so forth. And of course, it isn't just giving you testosterone replacement, it's making sure that you become a healthy individual as well. So yeah, on that, let's onwards, Steve, back with you.
Yeah, let's talk about what you mentioned, what role prolactin plays with men. And, you know, I kind of related to estrogen. A lot of people think, oh, estrogen's a female hormone. Yeah. Men shouldn't have estrogen. No, we need estrogen. And Mobster knows this as a power lifter, because without estrogen, Mobster's joints would be wrecked and his mood would be wrecked and he'd be depressed. And there's a lot of different things when it comes to low estrogen. So you don't want to drop your estrogen
to nothing.
To nothing.
You want something. You don't want to destroy it. Yeah. You don't want to lower it to zero.
But, you know, when you're running a cycle, you know, things are going to be off no matter what. So, you know, when you're running a cycle, when it comes to prolactin, it's not that big a deal to slam your prolactin down, but you want it to normalize after. This is why it's not a good idea to take anti-prolactin drugs, you know, nonstop. So one of the things that it's important with is enhancement of LH in the Leydig cells of the testes. So luteinizing hormone is very, very important. It's kind of it's the hormone that feeds your testes. So your pituitary glands will spit it out. Your testes will take it, and that will cause your balls to plump up. Now, if you're slamming your prolactin down, let's say off cycle, it can affect your LH number. So a lot of clients will come to me and like, Steve, I'm between cycles and my LH is kind of low. And I'll be like, well, you know, what are you taking? I'm like, no, Steve, I'm not taking anything. I don't understand what's going on. And then later on in our consultation, they'll mention, oh yeah, I'm taking this anti-prolactin drug. I'm taking Relax. I'm taking Promia. I'm taking Caber, which we're going to discuss later. And then I'm like, well, why didn't you mention to me this beginning? Yeah. I mean, that's what's causing your LH to be lagging like that. And it's not a big deal, but you really got to be aware of that. And the problem is when your LH is laggy, it's going to cause, you know, your testosterone levels to be affected. So it's not something we want to slam, especially in between cycles. So you want to be careful about that. But on cycle doesn't matter. Your LH goes to 0 when you're on a steroid cycle anyway. So it really is not that big a deal. But look, everything in the body has an effect. It's just like when you go outside and you kill all the ants in your yard. You're like, yes, I killed all the ants. I'm so proud of myself. Well, it has an unintended consequence because now fleas will take over your yard because the ants are the flea's enemy. So it's a balance. You got to balance things out when it comes to this stuff. Just like with estrogen, prolactin needs to be balanced properly as well. And also, there's other benefits of prolactin. The central nervous system. I'll let you and Mobster talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah.
Anxiety reducing, different things like that. One of the things too that doesn't get talked about is nature. Why men, after we ejaculate, your prolactin will go up. So your dopamine and prolactin run inverted. So when your dopamine goes down, your prolactin goes up. So after you do it, you know, what happens is your dopamine will drop back down, but your prolactin will skyrocket. And a big part of that is it's creating a refractory period in between. And that basically is why you lose interest, not just in sex, but you also lose interest in the girl. And that's an evolutionary trait that was put into place. Really, I mean, we could debate, we can have like 10 shows debating why this is, but
It's survival,
my
Steve. Survival.
well,
Survival. Can you imagine?
my theory is that it's to prevent overpopulation, because we see this with animals. Like rabbits have lots of rabbits because they get eaten a lot and they don't live very long. Rats have lots of rats because they get eaten and they, a lot of bad things happen to rats. They're food for owls and snakes and cats and lots of different things. They're very, on the food chain. So they have to have a lot, but human beings, we only have one at a time, or maybe two at a time, twins or triplets, very rarely. So for us, it's very important to control population in that way, but we also live a long period of time. We're not like rats. Rats in the wild live like 2 weeks because they get eaten so fast. We as humans live 80 years. So can you imagine if humans just, you had sex and you like wanted sex right again 5 minutes later with another woman and another woman and another woman and another woman, on and on, we would have this rapid overpopulation. We'd have like 50 billion people on earth right now. So that's one of the big reasons why nature gave mammals this ability to produce prolactin. So it does have a purpose, but we're going to talk about the negative consequences of a high prolactin in a second. But I'll let you in, Mobster. Why don't you touch on your
Right. So
opinion?
let me a few thoughts there. I'll go in reverse, right? So there's an argument to be made, as I say, for survival, Steve, because that moment, which there's actual science to support the fact that the way that we are when we have sex, and especially that particular moment when we're having an orgasm or whatever else, we're not thinking about the shopping or the TV or the bills or whatever else. So we're kind of lost in the moment. So there's an argument about survival saying if we were in that moment far too long or far too frequently, we'd be taking our eye off the ball. And in survival terms, it's fine to be in your bedroom, in your 2 up, 2 down, your mortgaged house, whatever, in modern society. But back in the day, we'd have had our asses eaten. We'd be so busy fucking, to put it crudely, shagging and or fucking, that the saber-toothed tiger would be ripping great chunks out of our leg. So yeah, survival. In terms of the conversation that Steve was saying, if you have a client or consult, if you're giving advice on the forums or wherever else, right? And this is the reason why we encourage the logs again. How often does a person talk about the medication on? Not often enough. How often will they say what they want to do in a cycle, and then only if they're asked? There's a few that are included, quite the majority will include it, but quite often they'll negate including their age and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we encourage, we don't want a 4-page essay, but we do want all the actual relevant information. So like Steve said, if Steve was doing a consult with you and you neglect to mention that you're on medication, that's going to affect your prolactin levels. That's missing one of the pieces of the puzzle. You need to make sure that information is included, because if we had a conversation, Steve, and they talked about everything except their body fat, and then we found out that they were 40% body fat, well, obviously that's going to have an effect on the information that we're going to, the advice we're going to give them, and of course, an effect on the hormones in their body. Absolutely. So we're going to get into the specifics of that later on. Something else which Steve touched upon again is the way that we tend to forget just how, especially in a fit, well, healthy, etc. individual, just how every single thing in our body, specifically the hormones in this example, is in balance with everything else. Absolutely. Good eyesight, good hearing, good teeth, good skin, your hormones working, regular, being able to urinate, regular being able to defecate, good digestion of food, the way you respond to steroids, how you respond to every single thing has an effect on the next thing. Sometimes it's a small effect, sometimes it's a great effect. And we sometimes forget the balance that our body likes, the homeostasis, how it likes to remain the same and not be pushed into one direction or another. And again, when we're using hormones, specifically as men, for the purposes of this podcast, when we're using steroids, we're putting something out of whack. So, of course, our body responds to the out of whack. It tries to bring us back to the normal situation, to homeostasis, to the fine balance that is difficult. In a very highly tuned, healthy, etc. individual, and I'm going to include Steve and I in this example, especially when I was super fit back in the day, we would notice straight away if something was inflamed or something. I feel a little bit off today, Steve. Oh, this is aching and it shouldn't be aching. Why is it aching? Why has my times on my runs gone down? And we become more and more self-aware in that particular regards of just how finely balanced certain things are. And obvious, and again, we'll get into this, if we overtrain, if we go crazy and so on and so forth. So yeah, let's go deep into the side effects, Steve.
Yeah, so let's talk about this because these are topics that a lot of men don't like to talk about. We have this machoism, toxic masculinity, bullshit. We've been kind of taught, maybe growing up by a father or uncle, to kind of not talk about our feelings and not discuss stuff like this. We definitely don't like to discuss this stuff with doctors, male or female. Like, who the fuck wants to do that? I can remember I was like 15 years old. It was the first time a woman touched me. It was a doctor when she was checking my balls. She was checking my balls to do a physical so I could play football. And, it turned me on a lot. It was the first time a woman touched me. And she was asking me these questions, and I was very, very uncomfortable with these questions. I was very embarrassed. So we've been taught always, it's like sex is dirty, sex is this, So it's different in Britain, Mobster, but when you grow up in the deep South in the United States, it's a different world.
Well, I don't know, Steve. I'm of an age now where I get prostate exams, and I've done all the jokes about losing the wedding ring.
You've gone first full circle with everything.
Yeah, so I think so. And to be perfectly honest, let me give you an example, guys.
The finger up the ass. You don't mind the finger up the ass?
So I've had conversations probably in the last 15, 20 years that would have never happened regarding the prostate. Once I hit 40, and even in jobs I've been doing, literally standing outside a shop or whatever else, doing the job that I was doing under contract, I've had older men come up to me, and God help us, at some point, not all the time, but occasionally we would get round to the prostate conversation because, you're an older gentleman, you're like me, and we're way more comfortable than my dad's generation. I don't recall any conversation like that with my dad, ever. And yet my generation, 40 plus, has been able to have those conversations, including the mental health stuff, which we never spoke about. Being depressed, never spoke about. Male suicide, never spoke about.
Because that was viewed as
erectile dysfunction, never spoke about erectile. All drug use, never spoke about those things. Never. Much better now.
Let's get into the first three, especially, are going to be very, very important to that. Low libido. Let's start with that. Low libido simply means these are symptoms that you're going to get when you have high prolactin, but it's also can be caused by other things, which complicates things, because a lot of people think, well, I could just slam my prolactin down and this will cure, but that's not the case. But a lot of times it will. If it's being caused specifically with high prolactin. Now, low libido is a big one, and this is an epidemic of proportions in America. I don't know if it's the same way in Britain. It's probably getting there. But low libido simply means you don't have the urge to want to do it, and this is a big problem. And we see this happening more and more, and there's many, many different reasons for it. But look, the high prolactin can definitely be a cause. And if you're using certain steroids or certain compounds, you may not be aware, like, why is my libido going down? Well, it could be because of high prolactin. The next one is delayed ejaculation, and that's called anorgasmia. And we've seen guys actually come on the forum and complain about this. And they've been like, well, I'm using Deco or I'm using Tren and I can't ejaculate. And a lot of people, over the years, I've seen guys, this happened more like 10, 20 years ago, believe it or not so much recently, but a lot of guys will make fun of those people, like, oh, you're full of shit, because they're the types that, like, they come like after 10 seconds or after a minute, but they can't get it through their head that not everybody is a Minuteman. So what happens is in this situation, you're having sex or having sex. I've had this happen to me on Deca, by the way, and I was not using any anti-prolactin drugs at the time because it was the first time I used Deca. I didn't know even at the time what prolactin was because in that time nobody discussed this stuff. Mobster 15 years ago, nobody discussed this shit on forums. But now we're a lot more open as a society where we can discuss it, like on these podcasts. But what this means is simply you can't come. Like you have sex, you're pounding the girl for like an hour, hour and a half, take breaks, you go and fucking go eat, and then you come back, you bang her again, you just can't come. And then the girl gets upset. She's like, what's wrong with me? Maybe he's not attracted to me. She's thinking that in her head. She doesn't understand what's going on. But this has happened to me on Deca, and this has happened to me on Trend.
Let me jump in here for a second here, Steve. Sorry, just to, I mean, it's just one of those facts of life jobs, guys. Listen, right? There's something called the honeymoon period when you're shagging like it's going out of fashion with your new girlfriend, your new partner, and perfectly normal to shag them way more times than you will normally. This is one of those issues when it's the normal level. If you are at it 8 times a night, trust me, the first couple of times are going to be relatively quick. The last couple are going to be take a lot longer. What happens sometimes here, Steve, is when guys are used to a certain time period, from to put it crudely, from getting on top and pounding away, and the average time how long it is between starting sex and finishing sex, and then it becomes half an hour, and it actually becomes almost fucking tedious compared to normal. Then that's what you're looking at there. Then it becomes a problem, and then it starts to play on your mind. And as Steve and I have done on other shows, when it starts to play in your mind, it gets fucking worse. But if it's specifically connected with estrogen and specifically connected with high prolactin, then there are things you can do about it. So yeah, again, Steve, people talk about it. One of the biggest issues with both the libido and the delayed ejaculation thing is, and I'm guilty of this too, Steve, the childish sense of humor. I thought anorgasmia would make a great name for a nightclub, for example. God, that's just the way my pure old sense of humor works. But also the way that men bullshit about what they do. When Steve and I do the occasional lifestyle men talking to men stuff, you have to be fucking brutally honest. You can't lie. You can't say you're at it 9 times a night. You can't say I'm on it for fucking half an hour. I don't give up. I'm like a machine. Because at some point that's not true. It might be true briefly. It might be true now. It won't be true in 5 or 10 years. So you need to be honest with this stuff. But again, this is specifically if it's connected to high prolactin. Back to you, Steve.
Next one, erectile dysfunction. Now, this is definitely one that back in the 80s, nobody talked about. I remember in the late 90s seeing the first erectile dysfunction commercial on TV. And I was at work, and I was in college at the time. I was a sophomore in college, and I was working this job in finance. I turned to one other dude who's older than me. Everyone I worked with was older than me. I was like the youngest dude there. And I turned to him, I'm like, dude, what the fuck is erectile dysfunction? I see these commercials for erectile dysfunction like all the time on TV. I'm like, dude, what is, because we'd have the business news channel on, and of course the business news channel caters to men, older men. I turned on, I'm like, dude, what is erectile dysfunction? And he just laughed at me like I was playing a joke. I had no fucking clue what it was.
You'll find out.
Yeah, that's what he should have said. But I had no fucking clue. So it's like, what is this? So basically it means you can't get it up. And again, this is a lot of guys complain about this. They say Deca dick. Oh, I've got Deca dick. This is what they're referring to. So this could
even Steve, a quality of erection. Yeah. When you're younger, it's like a fucking rock. Changes, the wind blows, it fucking gets hard. You can poke your own fucking eye out with it and so on. And then, of course, when you get older, you get unhealthy, you have blood pressure issues. So it's a softer erection.
So what do you think people did in the 80s when they had erectile dysfunction? You were pretty much
lollipop sticks and rubber bands.
And that caused, I guarantee you, and then they can talk about, I guarantee you that caused a lot of divorces in the 80s. A lot of divorces because of that. Now it's not the sexual dysfunctions of today. Because we have erectile dysfunction drugs, the sexual dysfunctions of today are just getting bored, because all the porn we watch, we want a redhead one day, a brunette the next, a blonde the next, a BBW, a MILF. We want every selection. It's like going to a buffet now because we presented that. But in the 80s, that wasn't the case. In the 80s, it was erectile dysfunction. Why am I divorcing my husband? He can't get it up.
One of the issues that's happened is younger people taking ED drugs just so they can shag all night, which I understand, but arguably, and I've actually said this, do not use a drug to get an erection when you don't need a drug to get an erection. Wait until it becomes an issue. Don't be using ED drugs when you're 18, 19, 20 years of age when you shouldn't have those issues.
Yeah.
Wait until you're an older person.
So it makes more sense. You just said now on a point. So the point is, it makes more sense to solve the prolactin issue and not have this issue in the first place, rather than covering it up with a dick drug. So the more you get used to these dick drugs, the more you're going to become reliant on them, where you're not even going to be able to do it without a dick drug. You don't want that. So let's cover some of the others, Mobster, because I don't want to spend the whole podcast.
No. Go on.
Puffy or sensitive, we already talked about. The discharge from nipples, we already talked about that. Another one is fatigue and lethargy. I wonder how many people out there, when they're on a trend cycle or they're on a DECA cycle, they complain about lethargy. Now, a big part of that is inflammation in the body. You're rapidly increasing strength, rapidly increasing mass. That can cause lethargy, and on its own, that can cause fatigue. So I wonder how much has to do with that versus prolactin. It just depends. Depression is another one. Sometimes people will run a cycle. We just had a guy do a log, and he's like on trend. He's like, "Oh, guys, I'm going through depression. I don't know what's wrong with me." Well, dude, it might be your prolactin, might be a big part of that. And then suppressed testosterone production. Now, this is not on cycle, but this would be in between cycles. If your prolactin stays elevated, we just had a guy post his prolactin numbers were like 3 times above where it should be. And, he was complaining that his testosterone levels are struggling to bounce. Well, if your prolactin is too high, it can prevent your testosterone production from bouncing back. If it's too low, it can also do that because, again, as I said, it affects your LH negatively. So this is both ways. It's got to be in that range where we want it. Anything you want to add to that, Monster, before we move on?
Yeah, Steve. I mean, I was thinking in terms of what you can do, and we're obviously going to discuss the steroids that can cause the issue. We're going to talk a bit more, I suspect, about estrogen. Obviously, its role in the body, and obviously, again, the products that you might be able to use that is going to help you. But let me touch on a few things. And Steve discussed these, and I discussed these in the pre-show. Right. So, for example, you're on cycle, and we're going to ignore for now the steroids you're using. If you train like an absolute motherfucker to the point of grinding yourself into the ground, you are overtrained. And if you're overtrained, you're not recovering. So literally you're stressing your body's systems and ability to recover. Ergo, you're going to have problems with prolactin. If you are doing, if it fits your macros, or everything you eat is processed, everything you eat is a ready meal, nothing's food prep, nothing's organic, you might have issues with prolactin, and especially if you're combining that with being overtrained. If you are just on the depression there thing, if you are, for example, going through a divorce, you've got 2 fucking mortgages, you're not making enough money to pay the goddamn bills, you're going to be stressed like a motherfucker, and just being stressed is going to put your hormones out of whack, including prolactin. And to a lesser degree, this was actually mentioned by the TRT doctors themselves. They were talking about the environmental factors. We've actually talked about this in other shows, Steve and I. If you are out, if you live where the water table has been infected by pesticides and you haven't got a water filter, if you are eating, as I said, unprocessed food versus organic food, homegrown, without pesticides, and so on and so forth, if you are breathing in the pollution from the nearby coal or oil refinery or steel plant or whatever, and it's all polluted air that you're breathing in, you're going to have issues. And again, this will affect your prolactin levels. But the number one thing, I think, Steve, is this combination of poor diet, and especially unhealthy diet, being fat. Let's not fuck around. You're way more likely to have issues with prolactin and estrogen if you're out of condition. And I mean properly fat. Literally, as Steve and I have described before, I think Steve said the fat guy in the basement on his computer talking shit and eating Cheerios. And then you'll see this person naked, God help us, on the internet or something, and they've got bigger boobs than the porn star, that kind of stuff. Obviously, that person's going to have issues with erection. Obviously, that person's going to have issues with estrogen, and so on and so forth. So, guys, we've said this so many times, the better condition you are, the better the cycle will go. The better condition you are, the healthier you are, the better your diet, the better results you'll get. And of course, you will have less issues with estrogen, less issues with prolactin. That all makes sense to you. And even silly little things. And for example, one of the things you can actually help is your vitamin B6. If your diet's healthy, if you're using, for example, an organ protector. If you're using better prepared testosterone boosters, in addition to be, someone that runs, someone that eats healthy, someone that trains, someone that looks after themselves, you should have better results than the people that do not do those things. So it makes sense. I mean, look, at the end of the day, bottom line should always be results. Bottom line should always be getting the best you possibly can from any stack or cycle that you're doing. And obviously, someone that's out of condition is going to have worse results than someone that's already in condition. And it isn't just a simple case of, oh, yeah, but they respond better. No, you're fatter, you eat shit, you're stressed, you're aggravated, the boss at work gives you shit, you're breathing in pollution. That person isn't. They live down by the coast, they got the sea breezes, they eat healthy, they go to the organic section of the supermarket. It's kind of obvious, but we sometimes, bless us, and I'm no different, and I don't think Steve is completely sort of oblivious to these things, sometimes try to cheat our way around the shortcomings that we really know we need to do something about in order to get the best results. So we talk about this on the forums all the time. The guys that get the best results have the best diet, the best training, never miss a session, look healthy, feel great, don't abuse steroids, and so on and so forth, Steve. But some of these environmental factors are things we can't avoid, but we can have water filters. We can choose to eat organically. We can pay a few extra bucks. We can meal prep, and we can monitor the way that we go crazy sometimes on training. For example, Steve, I've seen people on the forums whose volume is 3 times mine, and they're training 6 days a week, but they weigh half as much as I do. I'm kind of thinking, if you cut back on your volume a little bit, cut back to 4 days a week, you would add muscle, you would get bigger, you won't have these issues, and so on and so forth. If you're drinking, if you're abusing recreational drugs, if you've got a medical condition, if you are on certain kinds of medication, can you get the doctor to change the medication? Could you lower the dose? Can you change your training frequency? Can you improve your diet? These are all obvious things, guys, but again, we don't want to throw drugs at everything all the time when there are certain particular changes you can make for yourself. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, so there's other side effects too, headaches. And this is another common thing that we hear from people when they're on cycle. Now, again, headaches can be, this is the complicated thing about medicine. Medicine isn't black and white. So,
Yeah.
Headaches can be caused by a lot of things. You could have high blood pressure, water retention
Yes.
could be causing the headaches. But we see a lot of people have headaches on trend. We see a lot of people have headaches on DECA. And that can be caused by prolactin. It certainly isn't helping. So high prolactin can cause issues like that. But there's things too that aren't caused by any specific compounds that could be, a red flag when you have high prolactin. You could have pituitary tumors. So pituitary tumors can cause a lot of different side effects. And the only way you can really identify it is you go to a doctor and get an MRI. And that can be an issue. My gosh, I mean, that's a tough one to diagnose. You got to get that MRI done. So that could be something that could end up being the case. You could have a pituitary tumor. You could have an autoimmune immune disorder that can affect your pituitary gland and lead to increased prolactin. So there's other factors that could go on. Thyroid issues can cause high prolactin as well. So then in that case, you've got to work with a doctor to get on thyroid medication to balance the thyroid out, and that could help alleviate the prolactin issue. So there's so many different things. Another thing too that can cause high prolactin is your history. History with drug abuse, opiates, stuff like that, taking different things, because these things actually will affect dopamine levels in the brain, and in turn are going to cause prolactin levels to be off. And also sleep. I mean, sleep quality is important. If you're not sleeping, quality, you're not getting enough sleep, then prolactin levels can be way off in that situation as well. There's also things that can cause prolactin issues like kidney issues, liver issues, certain types of surgeries that may trigger it, all kinds of things. Chest wall trauma is another one that can cause it. So there's different things that can definitely cause prolactin issues that have nothing to do with things that are within your control. We can control what we can control. What Mobster was saying is right. I mean, you keep pesticides in your house, which is beyond ridiculous, or herbicides, you're going to keep that stuff, keep it outside the house, like in a shed or something. Don't keep it in
Mm.
your house where it's being, in your house where you're killing yourself. Don't have some dude, some pest control guy, joke of a guy come in your house and spray all over your house and spray in your bedroom and spray so you can be exposed to that crap. That's smart things that we can do. And that's not just for prolactin, that's for everything. Make sure the water that gets in your house, if you own your house, get one of those filtration systems that cost some money and have it put in your garage or have it put outside where it filters the water that comes into your house. These are simple things that you can do, and to help with your prolactin levels that are very, very important. Anything you want to add that to Monster before I move into which compounds can cause a spike
Yeah,
in prolactin?
just briefly, Steve, is the most of the science when Steve and I were doing a pre-show research, Steve already touched upon the issue with the pituitary gland, and I believe, and I think, see if I can pronounce this properly, Steve, prolactoma, or prolactoma, which is essentially the body's overproduction because of issues with the pituitary gland or prolactin. And so most of the science, unfortunately for men, was associated with that. There was only a little bit of the stuff that we're talking about on the show today. And obviously, the vast majority of information on prolactin was, as Steve said right at the beginning of the show, regarding the effects of and the production of in the body of women. So it was interesting for us in terms of the show research, but it was difficult because, of course, it meant we had to avoid that and look specifically for men, and specifically, of course, as per all these podcasts, for those using performance enhancing drugs. One more thing, Stephen, it just occurred to me with regards to alcohol, for example, and it's strange how this works. You're way more likely, for example, to see issues with estrogen and prolactin in fat motherfuckers who sit in the bar all day long versus your pure full-on alcoholic. And the reason for that is that the ones that are sitting at the bar are also eating and get fat and then get gyno and have estrogen and prolactin issues versus your full-on alcoholic, which tends not to eat half as much of the food they should do and ends up to be skinny, but a real fucking alcoholic abuser and whatever. But they're still going to have some of the same issues, Steve. Don't want to see that person naked either. Purely and simply because of the things, like Steve says, whether it's recreational, whether it's medically prescribed, whether it's alcohol induced, and of course, as Steve said, previous history. And that includes family history. We would occasionally talk about people that
Yeah.
are obese, and we'll see, that's a family thing. Well, that's because they all eat crap, and so on. So let's move on anyway.
Yeah, let's move on and let's talk about some compounds you wouldn't think that cause a spike in prolactin. Now, all these compounds are sold by Euro-Pharmacies, so you can buy them, and we don't gotta be scared. We don't have to be scared of using these compounds just because they boost prolactin. We're not trying to say avoid these compounds. My gosh, I mean,
Absolutely not.
yeah, but we have to be aware. It's just like using testosterone. You use testosterone, your estrogen goes up. So we
Yep.
take an aromatase inhibitor to lower estrogen back down. No big deal. All right. It doesn't mean you have to avoid using
Don't go
testosterone.
crazy on the dosage, Steve. Don't use grams and grams
All right.
of the ones that are going to cause issues. Use lower amounts and so on.
Let's hit these. First off, let's start with peptides, and growth hormone releasing peptides can cause increased prolactin levels. GHRP6, GHRP2, hexarelin, these are the main peptides that the main GHRP, some GHRHs, those can cause a rise in prolactin. Not a lot, but it's something to be aware of. Another thing is antidepressants. This is something that we see with certain situations. This is why people who take antidepressants complain that their sex drive drops and they have problems with erections. They have all these issues that we went over when it comes to symptoms of high prolactin. So it's very important to be aware of this. And you've got to realize that when it comes to, you know, antidepressants, this is something you need to work with your doctor on and hopefully maybe consider, easing yourself off of them because they do have consequences. Anyway, when it comes to steroids now, there are a couple, the 19-nor testosterone group of steroids are very, very important to be aware of. And these are structured in a way where when you take them, prolactin can go up. Okay. So nandrolones, the nandrolone phenylpropionate, the decadurabolin, these are the main nandrolones that we know about. And then trembolone. And there's all kinds of trenbolones. There's Trenhex, Trenace, different esters of trenbolone. So parabolin, wherever you want to call it. So the trenbolone family, the DECA family, the nandrolone family, these class of steroids cause prolactin increases. They can cause prolactin increases. Now, all my years, I've seen it become a huge issue to the point where your nipples are having discharge. And these are people who've abused these
Yes,
compounds, especially with Tren. They've abused them for a year. They've gone on. But it doesn't mean in your body these other side effects aren't occurring. Once it gets to the point where you're having discharge from your nipples, that's like, wow, your prolactin has been not only out of control, but
absolutely.
it's been
Yeah.
out of control for a long time
Mm,
to where you're
mm.
actually noticing something like that. So you let it get way, way too far. In that situation, you got to slam that prolactin. But when you're running these compounds, it's important to be aware you don't necessarily have to run anti-prolactin drugs or supplements, but it's a good idea. And if you're going to abuse them over time, let's say you run Tren off and on for 2 years, then you definitely should consider using an anti-prolactin drug or supplement. So, Mobster, do you want to start us off with some anti-prolactin drugs or supplements that you would recommend?
Right. So, one very simple thing, guys, you can absolutely use, and you would look for something like this in a good organ protector. And I say a good, properly formulated organ protector is you're looking for, and this is just on the vitamins and supplement side of things, Steve, an effective dose of vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 specifically is incredibly good in and of itself at reducing the amount of prolactin or prolactin issues. And you're looking at a minimum effective dose would be 200 to 300 milligrams a day. And again, make sure that when you're looking at your organ protector of choice, and obviously we recommend certain products, that it has an effective dose in there, and certainly an effective dose of the number of pills, capsules, etc. you're using. And the same thing would be, for example, a good dose of vitamin E. And I'd imagine that would be in an oil form for that particular one, Steve. And those are the obvious ones. You even need to look at, and again, this is absolutely important. So, quite strangely, one of the uh, ingredients that are in a lot of test boosters, including ones that we talk about, is fenugreek. But too much fenugreek in and of itself will actually cause an increase in prolactin. So make sure, again, and we've discussed this when we talked about those shows of products, Steve, make sure that the other ingredients balance out those effects. Don't have too high of a dose. Make sure other ingredients are working at the same time. Make sure that the same products have got vitamin B6 at an effective dose, and so on and so forth. So those are the obvious ones. And that's just on the supplemental side, Steve. Obviously, as I said earlier, on healthy diet, good training, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of actual medications, there's a bunch of medications, as we know, Steve. And the obvious top three would be Prami, Caber, and Riloxifene. And of course, we're going to specifically talk about one of those at the end as a Euro-Pharmacies product. But listen, right? When we're talking about, say, for example, let Steve jump in just for a second here with the benefits of Caber.
Yeah, so Caber is one of the most popular drugs, and I've used Caber, and it was very effective for me. So with Caber, you want to use a small amount. Caber is quite expensive, by the way. So, but don't freak out when you look at how much it costs because you're not going to need to use that much. Literally a 1/4 milligram twice a week, okay, would do a very good job on a Tren or DECA cycle, or if you're using one of these peptides to definitely keep prolactin under control. So you don't need to use much. And let me tell you something. When I use this stuff, you want to talk about something to take on a honeymoon with you? Woo! The refractory period, what I talked about earlier, where you lose interest in what was the term you used, Mobster? For that term, you're like shagging. Yeah, for shagging, if you want to reduce the amount of refractory time in between shagging, where you're gonna have the urge after, and I'm a person, I go long time and I take a long time in between. But this stuff cut it by a lot. Cut it by a lot. So you're ready to go like the next day. You don't need a couple days to rehydrate and stuff, right? You're ready to go a lot quicker. So Caber, this shit works. And add that to Tren, you'll be a freaking monster. You'll be a monster. So that's the honeymoon stack. Add in that Caber in there, or any of these anti-prolactin medications. Another anti-prolactin medication is also going to be Prami. Bromo is another one. And then raloxifene is another one. And you can go on Euro-Pharmacies and find these drugs on there. Raloxifene is sold on Euro-Pharmacies. What's the dose? What's the raloxifene mobster for Euro-Pharmacies that comes in?
Yeah, they do. It's the raloxifene product is called Reloxifex. That's FEX at the end, and it's 40 pills, which are each 60 milligrams, Steve.
Yeah, so again, you don't need much. You don't need much. And you can take just like bite into one pill and take that 2-3 times a week, and that'll do a good job. You can start at that dose. That'll do a good job of reducing your prolactin. So these drugs that are out there are very effective. You don't want to take too much of them. Okay. You got to remember they're dopamine agonists. So they're gonna go in there, they're gonna boost your dopamine, and they're gonna drop your prolactin down. So that's how these drugs work. So some of you have really good reaction to them. They'll have really good reaction to them, and they'll work quite effectively. It's not like you have to take these drugs like hormones, where they have to be in your system nonstop, because you can just take it, drop the prolactin, then your prolactin will slowly start bouncing back. Then you take it again, it drops it back down, then the prolactin start bounces back. You see what I'm saying? It's not like a hormone that has to be in your system all the time. So that would be really good. So you can start even with once a week or twice a week. You don't have to take these drugs often. They'll do the jobs for you. So yeah, you're covered on that aspect. And then look, at the end of the day, it's one of those things where, when it comes to bromo, the dose range is 1.25 to up to 10 milligrams a day. But with bromo, it has a short half-life. So bromo is very rarely used. I won't even bother with it. And I won't even bother with bromo. So your best bet is either going with the raloxifene or the Caber. So if you do decide to go with Prami, you need to slowly increase your dose. You can start with 1/4 milligram for the first few days. You can even go less than that. You can go with 0.125 milligrams. Very, very tiny amount. Literally use a pill cutter where you just bite into it. And then you can kind of gradually. Prami does have a shorter half-life than Caber. So again, that's why Prami is less popular. So really, the raloxifene or the Caber are going to be your best bets when it comes to dealing with prolactin, in my opinion. But look, any of them will work perfectly fine. Mobster?
Yes, Steve. So let me touch upon one thing, and then I'm going to talk about something else that I actually looked at with regards to raloxifene. So, for example, if you abuse, and we've had to give young men advice on this before. If you abuse, for example, cabergoline or Caber as a way of reducing your refractory period and to enjoy that quote unquote honeymoon stuff that Steve talks about. Let's put it this way, Steve, and again, these are the sort of facts that are laid out. And I've been in that situation briefly at some period in my life, and I had multiple girls, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and so on and so forth. Looked like I was trying to get a Guinness Book of Records at some point and going crazy, and using ED drugs at the same time. So look, right, you're not going to be able to do these things all the time. And if, for example, you somehow imagine as a younger man that you can take Caber, reduce your refractory period, shag 19 times in a day, and then do the same thing the next day, and so on and so forth, that's not going to happen, guys. And you will actually end up, arguably, if you do abuse Caber, give yourself problems with regards to, for example, blood pressure and arguably even heart issues. Let me just give you a little bit of science, and this was from a study specifically. Raloxifene was associated with a 25.9%, this was an average, mind you, the variables were from 8 to 55% decrease in prolactin levels in 10 out of the 14, that's a 71% figure, of the patients that had a specific issue with the pituitary gland and prolactinoma, basically where the body was overproducing prolactin. So 25.9%, a quarter of a reduction versus the 100% is, and again, some of those numbers were as high as 55%, is significant in what we're looking at here, and gives you an idea of just how effective that stuff is. Again, I suspect Raloxifene probably doesn't work quite as much as Caber does in regards to the refractory period, but that just maybe second guessing, Steve. Talk about also, I mean, Steve and I talk about this a lot, but Steve's the expert here. What you need to look at for, Steve, when it comes to having blood tests. And I will say this, pre-show research again, all of the experts that I listened to and made notes from, we're talking about pre, intra, during, and post blood test. In other words, how the hell do you know what's going on if you don't know what's going on? You need to look. You need to be, and this is, for example, Steve, if we were talking about varying the amount of AI you were using, never mind something that's going to help you with prolactin, purely and simply because you need to know these things. Don't wait, like we said earlier on, until you're fucking milking, like a cow. At that particular point, you're way past, what the hell we're going to be able to do with you, sort of thing. So yeah, talk about blood tests, Stephen, the importance.
Yeah, so here's the problem with blood work. The normal hormone panels with that people get doesn't usually include prolactin. So if you're going through a doctor, if he's, familiar with, bodybuilders and stuff like that, a lot of times he'll know to add it. But a lot of times you have to tell your doctor, hey, can you please add prolactin to my blood work on top of the other stuff too? So that would be something you would do. Now, if you're ordering your blood work independently online or whatever, then you're going to have to get the basic hormone panel, and then you're going to have to manually add in prolactin and pay extra for it. So it's usually not included in these hormone panels. So that's very important to realize. Now, what do you have to look for? Now, when it comes to normal prolactin levels, it's 20 nanograms per deciliter or less. That's where you want it. So with men, again, should you slam it to 0? No. But is it going to kill you to do that on cycle? No. Because remember what I said, the only really danger of slamming your LH, I'm sorry, the only danger of slamming your prolactin is LH, but your LH is already suppressed and shut down anyway. Because your pituitary glands aren't sending out any LH anyway when you're on cycle. So it's very important to realize that. So really, when it comes to your blood work, look for less than 20 nanograms per milliliter. I think I said deciliter per milliliter in your blood work. That's what you want to look for. And we see, look, if it's at 25 or 30, it's not a big deal. But we've seen blood work. I've seen blood work of guys 60, 80, 100, and on and on. And that is a problem. And if you abuse something, obviously, the higher it gets, the more chance that you get more severe side effects. So that's not a good idea to do. So just keep an eye on that. So, Mobster, you want to touch on final thoughts on that, and then talk about Euro-Pharmacies?
Yeah, so listen, it's one of those things. Come onto the forums, especially when it comes to the blood test information, guys, because we sometimes forget these things, and it's always good to be refreshed and to make sure, as Steve said, that the panels definitely include that additional bits of information. It's sometimes just a question of what boxes do I need to tick when I'm online, or when you go to the clinic, etc., either in the form that you've got in your hand or online, to make sure that you get. For example, guys, and we've discussed this multiple times on the forums. If you can get the test for testosterone, make sure it uncapped versus the capped. The capped's an indicator, but the uncapped will give you a truer picture. Same thing here, guys. Standardized tests, including the test that I would have as an older gentleman, will not include the information that we want if we're using PEDs and we want to get a true picture of what's going on. And again, this is just about information for you. It's about you having a good idea, because you can control the variables that we discussed earlier. Right, Steve, I'll touch upon Euro-Pharmacies. And as I say in every single show where we talk about Euro-Pharmacies, they are my go-to. They're like my local supermarket for me, in terms of there are specialized places I can go for fish and specialized places I can go for meat. But when I want all of those things in one particular place, then that for me is Euro-Pharmacies. They have every single thing that I need all in one place. They just recently, for example, Steve, and I talked about on another show, how they've been innovative with their 15 ml vials. They've literally just announced, and Steve and I actually included this in a show that we recorded last week, the new layout, product descriptions, etc., that they're using on their sachet products. So any of the oral steroids and other orals that they produce via the resellers, you can see that are now completely new design, new layout, and it looks like a new product. Same solid product before, but a better, more a cleaner look, etc., to the products they're producing. So they're not sitting on their laurels. I like any company that you and I talk about, Steve, It shouldn't just be, it should always be solid product. It should always be it works and does exactly what it says on the tin. It should always be that we can trust them. And Steve will touch upon that as well. But equally, I like these companies to be looking to either expand the line, to include new products, to follow the market in terms of what's going on, what people want, asking customers, talking to customers, but also making sure, for example, on their vials, Steve, they do a 3-layer label. Literally, the top bit that you would normally see, you can peel that back and read the reverse, and then there's another layer on the vial underneath. So there's more information available if you want it, and that's just on the 3-layer label. On the sachets, it's a much cleaner, nicer look, and so on and so forth. Something I like, Steve, and when I talk about Euro-Pharmacies as a client, I don't like what we call fly-by-night companies. I've been around long enough to see companies that lasted months, not even a year. Euro-Pharmacies is up around the 20-year mark, Steve. And that's 2 decades of being able to do solid, trustworthy products is a big fucking deal. It really is. A couple of other companies that Steve and I are talking about are not at that level yet, and they're already on a decade plus. Okay, you wouldn't see multiple resellers stocking their product unless their product was trustworthy and has been consistently trustworthy. And then you've got things like, which I discuss again on these shows all the time, Steve, lab tests. And I don't just mean in-house, in your own lab, where you're producing the products, and you take a sample and you take it off to another section of the lab and you test it to make sure that the guys in the production line are producing solid products. No, there's 2 ways of doing this. That's one. The first one, which I've already mentioned, 3 ways, in-house. The second one is taking a product from the production line randomly and sending it off to an independent lab outside of your company and having it tested with no extra grind. They want honest results. They want to see what's going on. And again, this keeps everybody in production and the company on their toes, make sure they're doing their job. And then finally, what we call true independent testing. It's the kind that we do occasionally over here with one magazine, the name of which escapes me. And also we have something called trading standards. You've got something similar in America, where they will take products off the shelf in the supermarket and take them to the lab and test them. So what do we have when it comes to PEDs? We've got people like myself and Steve who use anabolics. And we have members on the forums, not just on our family forums, but other forums, who will take random products from sponsors and approved sources. And this is exactly what's happened in our particular example. 10 products from 10 different approved sources. And they weren't all the same product. They were different products for different reasons that you might use at some point in some cycle. And they sent them off at their own expense to a lab to be tested. We're looking, it used to be crazy money, Steve, but even with the decrease in the cost, you're talking about a bunch of cash, certainly enough to buy you a whole other cycle. And that was out of their own pocket. And in the particular person in question, the member in question, literally said, I thought of the 10 products that I grabbed off the shelf, so to speak, 8 would be good, 2 would fail. Not 1 failed. And that included Euro-Pharmacies. Not 1 product failed. Everything was within the allowable deviation in the pharmaceutical industry, never mind UGLs, never mind approved sources, of within 5% of the number on the label. Every single product. In fact, if I recall properly, Steve, it was between 97 and 98% was the average across the range. So every single product, including Euro-Pharmacies, independently tested by someone paying out of their own pocket and hoping to catch companies out, couldn't catch out a company. So what about you, Steve, and Euro-Pharmacies as well, before we finish?
Yeah, so it's important with Euro-Pharmacies, again, as I mentioned earlier, don't be scared to use Trend. Don't be scared to use DECA, from Euro-Pharmacies. They're excellent. If you want to bulk and get stronger, DECA is a wonderful steroid. It's got a lot of benefits. Nandrolone, phenylpropionate, all the nandrolones. Trend, at some point use Trend, not as a newbie, but at some point use it, because it will take your, everything to the next level. Once you truly hit a plateau, it will take you to the next level when it comes to strength, size, physique, everything, dreams come true on Trend. So don't be afraid to use them just because they have effects on prolactin. But it's important to remember with your pharmacies, it's high quality products. They have you covered across the board when it comes to your ancillaries, your anti-prolactin drugs, you're covered. So don't be scared to use them. Just use them properly. That's all we need to do. But Euro-Pharmacies products are great. They're one of the top 3 or top 5 brands in the world. And this is one of the ones that I recommend to my clients. I trust them. I trust them with my clients. I trust them with
Yeah.
myself. And I know
Yep.
Mobster is a big fan of them as well. So
Huge.
this is why you should definitely check them out. And they have a really, really, really good products across the board.
Just to finish then, guys, make sure you use sensible doses. Make sure, if you possibly can, if as per someone else, if you can afford the steroid stack, you can afford a blood test. Make sure to get your blood test. Manage what you can: food, health, environment. Do what you can. Reduce your stress levels, etc., etc. Obviously, then use the information that we've given you today with regards to products that you can use, specifically Euro-Pharmacies products that you can use to help you manage your prolactin levels. Understand the importance of not destroying your estrogen, having some prolactin going on versus completely removing these from the table and hoping for the best, because that's not how the body works. So understanding that balance is key here. And then finally, as always, we want you to come onto the forums and let us know what you think about the show. If we missed any pieces of information, let us know in the comments below. Stuff that we could have covered but didn't cover, we always want to know what you think, guys. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.